The night was cold. The alley was almost silent except for the faint rustling of something moving behind an overflowing dumpster. Mark froze. He had come to throw away some cardboard from his shop, but the moment he heard the soft whimpering, his heart tightened. Slowly he stepped closer. Under the flickering streetlight, he saw a tiny figure digging desperately through the trash, her small hands trembling as she scavenged for food. When she lifted her face toward him, Mark felt the world tilt, because the little girl staring back with frightened blue eyes looked exactly like the missing heiress, whose posters had been plastered all over the city for days. But how did a child worth millions end up alone, freezing and searching for scraps? Before I reveal the shocking truth that changed both their lives forever, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Hopeful Stories so you never miss another life-changing story. Mark had finished closing his small bookstore early that evening, exhausted from the slow business day. His mind occupied with worries about rent, bills, and how hard it had become to keep the shop alive. As he walked through the back alley with a stack of flattened boxes, he tried to distract himself by humming. But the unexpected sound from behind the dumpster instantly silenced him. It wasn't the rustling of an animal, there was a human. Fragility in it, the soft whimper of someone holding back tears. When Mark moved closer, the sight before him stopped him cold. A little girl, no older than 7, wearing a thin torn dress and clutching a dirty stuffed rabbit, was kneeling in the trash, rummaging like she hadn't eaten in days. Her blonde hair was tangled, her cheeks smudged with dirt, and her lips were trembling from the biting cold. "Hey, sweetheart," Mark said softly, not wanting to scare her. She gasped and backed away instantly, pressing herself against the dumpster as though expecting to be hurt. I didn't take anything," she whispered, voice barely audible. Mark knelt down slowly, keeping his hands visible. "It's okay. You're not in trouble. Are you hungry?" Her eyes darted to the brown paper bag he carried, leftover pastries from the bakery next door. Oh. When he gently opened it and pushed it toward her, her stomach growled so loudly it startled even her. She grabbed a piece of bread and devoured it, with such desperation that Mark felt his chest ache. But then he saw something impossible to ignore. A small bracelet on her wrist, gold, engraved with initials he recognized instantly. E.R. Evelyn Rosewood, the missing child from the wealthy Rosewood family, whose kidnapping had dominated the news. The entire city had been searching for her. For over a week, her parents offered a huge reward, pleading for her safe return. And now, unbelievably, she was here in a filthy alley, alone. "Sweetheart," Mark said carefully. "What's your name?" She hesitated, clutching her stuffed rabbit tightly. "Evie." "Eve." His breath caught. "Eve, where are your parents?" Her eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head. "Bad men. They took me. But then they started fighting, and I ran away. I got lost. They might find me." She shuddered violently, fear gripping every word. Mark felt a surge of protectiveness stronger than anything he'd ever felt before. "You're safe now," he promised, placing his coat around her tiny shoulders. She looked impossibly fragile inside it, like a wounded bird trying to disappear. But time was critical. If the men who kidnapped her realized she had escaped, they could be searching for her right now. Mark knew he had to get her out of there. But the moment he reached for his phone to call the police, she panicked, shaking her head. "No," they said. "If I tell anyone, they'll hurt Mommy," she cried, her voice collapsing with terror. Mark froze. He needed to reassure her, but lying to a scared child wasn't the answer. "Eve," he said gently, wiping her tears with a napkin, "the police won't let anything bad happen to your mommy. And I won't either, I promise." She stared at him, trembling, trying to decide if she could trust him. Her tiny fingers slowly reached for his hand, hesitant, fragile, hopeful. And when she finally took it, Mark knew this wasn't just a moment of kindness. It was a moment that would change his life forever. He didn't know that the men who kidnapped her were already watching the news, already realizing she had escaped and already retracing their steps. Heading straight toward the alley Mark was standing in, Mark lifted Eve into his arms, bundling her in his coat as he rushed toward the front of his bookstore, every shadow suddenly feeling like a threat. The streets were quiet, but he could not shake the feeling that danger was creeping closer with each passing second. Eve clung to him tightly, her little heart pounding so hard he could feel it through his shirt. "It's okay," he whispered, even though he wasn't sure it was. When he reached the shop, he quickly locked the doors and shut the blinds. Only then did Eve relax enough to breathe normally. Mark warmed her hands with his own and made her a cup of hot cocoa, watching the fear slowly slip from her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, sounding shocked that anyone was helping her without wanting something in return. "You're safe here," he said, sitting beside her. "But I need to call someone to protect you." Eve hesitated, then nodded as though finally realizing she had no choice. Mark dialed the police hotline, and before he could explain much, the operator transferred him to the special investigative unit that had been handling the Heiress's case. "Stay where you are," they instructed. "A team is on the way." But just as Mark hung up, headlights swept across the front of the shops, slow, deliberate, and stopping directly outside. Mark peeked through a crack in the blinds. A black van, the same kind described in the news. His heart thudded painfully. "Eve," he whispered urgently, "we need to hide." Without a second thought, he carried her to the small storage room behind the shop and tucked her behind boxes of books, covering her with blankets to keep her warm. "Don't make a sound," he urged, "no matter what you hear." She nodded, tears shining in her eyes again, but this time she trusted him. The pounding on the front door shook the entire shop. "Open up," a deep voice demanded. Mark stood frozen for a moment before stepping out to face them. His knees trembled, but his resolve didn't. "We're closed," he said through the door. "Come back tomorrow." The man outside slammed the glass. "We know you have the girl." Mark's blood turned to ice. But just as fear threatened to overwhelm him, sirens erupted in the distance, growing louder. The men outside panicked. Doors slammed. The van screeched away just as police cars turned the corner. Moments later, officers swarmed the shop, guiding Mark outside while another team searched for Eve. When they found her curled behind the boxes, shaking but alive, the entire unit let out a collective breath. Minutes later, a luxury convoy arrived. A woman ran toward Eve with a scream of pure heartbreak and relief. Her mother? She fell to her knees, hugging her child with a desperation only a mother could feel. Eve lifted her stuffed rabbit and whispered, "He saved me." The mother turned to Mark, tears streaming down her face. "You brought my daughter back." Mark shook his head humbly. "She saved herself. I just helped her get the rest of the way." But the truth was, he saved her in every way that mattered. Days later, the Rosewood family invited him to their mansion to thank him privately. Mark went expecting nothing, but they insisted he accept a reward enough money to finally save his struggling bookstore. But to Mark, the real reward had already happened, the moment Eve smiled at him without fear. And from that day forward, he knew that sometimes the smallest people carry the biggest stories. And sometimes the simplest kindness can change the ending of a life forever. If this emotional story moved you, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Hopeful Stories for more powerful, inspiring stories that touch the heart.